There's a reason why you've read all the books, watched every video, whispered every affirmation into the mirror, and still some part of you feels unloved. Still some part of you aches in silence. You don't talk about it often. You've mastered the smile, the posture, the life that looks put together, but late at night or in those quiet in-between moments, the questions return. Why do I feel so disconnected? Why does love feel just out of reach? Like a dream I've been told exists, but never truly touched. And here's the brutal, liberating truth, one that Carl Jung understood with unnerving clarity. You're not truly loved, because you have not yet truly shown up as who you are. Not because you're pretending on the outside, but because you've exiled parts of yourself on the inside. And as long as you remain fragmented, the love you attract will only ever touch the fragments, not the whole. That is the ache you feel. The ache of being partially seen, of being conditionally accepted, of being chosen only for the mask you wear, never for the full spectrum of who you are. And it's not your fault. You were taught to hide, taught to adapt, taught that being lovable meant being pleasing, quiet, productive, impressive, soft, agreeable, not too much, not too sensitive, not too angry, not too messy. And so you buried your realness in exchange for relationships that felt safe but never fulfilling. You called it love. But it was survival, Carl Jung said. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you truly are is not a linear path. It is a stripping away. It is a return. It is a confrontation with every part of yourself you've been taught to abandon. The reason you're not truly loved yet is not because love has abandoned you, it's because you've abandoned yourself. And as long as you continue to exile your shadows, your fire, your neediness, your fears, your desires, you will unconsciously attract people who mirror your disconnection. You'll crave intimacy, but sabotage it. You'll long for acceptance, but repel it. Because what you reject within will always be reflected without. Think about the person you couldn't stop obsessing over, the one who made you feel unworthy, small, insecure. Was it really them, or was it what they triggered in you, what they reflected back to you that you hadn't yet made peace with? That's the mirror. Every attraction, every trigger, every moment of emotional chaos, it's not random. It's a revelation of your inner world, of the parts still unhealed, of the self you've refused to fully reclaim. And this is where everything begins to change. When you stop asking, why don't they love me the way I need, and start asking, what parts of me have I still not accepted? Because love is not something you get, it's something you meet, it's something that resonates. And it can only truly resonate with you when you've made peace with every part of your being. Jung didn't teach people how to find love. He taught them how to find themselves. And when you find yourself, the right people stop feeling so far away. Not because the world changed, but because your frequency did. You start to notice who drains you and who energizes you. You start to feel the difference between chemistry based on trauma and chemistry based on truth. You start to realize that some of the people you chased weren't meant to stay. They were meant to awaken. To shake loose the layers, to show you where your worth still depended on performance, to remind you of where you still abandoned yourself for the illusion of connection. And when you wake up to that, you stop blaming them. You stop waiting for closure. You stop rehearsing the past and start reclaiming the present. You begin to sit with yourself, not the curated self, but the raw, unfiltered, aching self. And you begin to listen, not to fix, not to improve, but to witness. And that witnessing, that's where love begins. Because the truth is, you cannot be truly loved if you are not truly known. And you cannot be truly known if you keep hiding behind personas built for acceptance. Jung called that persona a mask for the collective, a necessary interface, yes, but dangerous when mistaken for the self. And many of us have mistaken our masks for our identities. We've forgotten what it feels like to be loved for our essence because we've buried it so deep we've stopped loving it ourselves. So how do you return? How do you show up as your whole self when the world has rewarded you for the opposite? It begins with radical self-confrontation, with noticing your patterns without judgment, with sitting in your triggers and asking what they're trying to teach you, with watching who you become when you feel rejected and choosing not to abandon yourself there. It begins by turning toward the shadow, not to banish it, but to integrate it, to see the parts you once labeled as unlovable as the very keys to your liberation. Your anger is not the enemy, it's your protector. Your neediness is not weakness, it's your longing for intimacy. Your jealousy is not proof of your smallness, it's the wounded part of you that still believes love is scarce. These are not flaws, these are signposts, and when you follow them inward, they lead you back to the wholeness that was never lost, only forgotten. The irony is once you stop trying to be lovable, you become magnetic. Not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've embodied yourself. You've stopped outsourcing your worth to those who can't hold it. You've stopped filtering your essence to fit someone else's comfort zone. You've stopped performing and started being. And in that being, you attract people who don't just tolerate your truth, they resonate with it. Because they too have walked the path inward. They too have faced their shadows. They too are no longer looking for someone to complete them, but to meet them. And when two whole people meet, love stops being a transaction. It becomes an expansion, a sacred mirror, a space where both light and shadow are welcomed, where wounds are not judged, but held, where growth is not demanded, but inspired. This is the kind of love you've been searching for, but it doesn't live in someone else's arms. It begins in your own. So no, the reason you're not truly loved yet is not because you are broken. It's because you are still hiding. But now you know. And knowing gives you a choice. Will you continue to perform, to perfect, to pursue love as if it's something outside of you? Or will you begin the only journey that ever truly matters? The one inward, the one Jung mapped out. The one where every step toward your shadow is a step toward your soul. Your answer is your life. And when you choose the inward path, everything begins to shift, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you're no longer fragmented within it. You begin to see clearly the people you've loved the most were never meant to complete you. They were mirrors, and those mirrors, whether soft or sharp, were never lying. They were showing you everything you had disowned, every wound you refused to look at, every trait you tried to bury, every part of your essence that went unloved inside of you. They weren't your salvation. They were your reflection. This realization hits hard, because it means the pain wasn't betrayal, it was revelation. It means they didn't reject you. They simply couldn't find the real you because you weren't showing up as them. You were showing up as an echo of your conditioning. As a version of yourself built to be accepted, not to be known. And no one can truly love a version of you that you don't even love yourself. So you begin to unlearn. Slowly. Quietly. Sometimes painfully. You start to recognize how often you silence yourself to keep the peace. How often you apologize for your truth to remain in someone's good graces. How often you pretend not to care just so you don't seem too needy. How often you deny your instincts just to seem agreeable. And then you realize, every time you do that, every time you shrink, every time you mold yourself for someone else's comfort, you're teaching your nervous system that love requires self-abandonment. And your nervous system believes you. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is not just about your thoughts. This is about the felt sense of safety in your body. You don't just intellectually believe that love is dangerous. You feel it in your breath, your posture, your hesitation to speak up. And that feeling didn't begin with the last person who hurt you. It began long before that, in a childhood moment, in a subtle withdrawal, in a pattern of inconsistency. It began in those moments when love and pain arrived together, and your body learned to be loved. I must betray myself. You want to know why you haven't been truly loved yet? Because you've been attracting from that place. That abandoned place. That aching place. And what we attract from, we recreate. Not out of punishment, but out of hope. Hope that this time it will be different. That this time, if I just love better, perform harder, stay quiet longer, I'll finally be chosen. But you won't. Because the real you isn't in the room. No one can choose what they cannot see, and this is where your power returns. Not in blaming them, not in shaming yourself, but in reclaiming your presence. You begin to notice the signals, how your body tenses around certain people, how your voice changes when you feel unsafe, how your energy contracts when you sense rejection. You start listening not to react, but to understand. Not to fix, but to witness. You stop forcing connection and start observing its cost. And when the cost is your truth, you say no. Not out of bitterness, not out of fear, but out of love for the one person who is always waiting for you to come back you. Jung didn't ask us to become better. He asked us to become whole, to stop striving for perfection and start integrating the mess. He believed the soul doesn't want to be fixed, it wants to be seen. And that includes the anger you're ashamed of, the longing you were taught to hide, the needs you labeled as weakness, the dreams you gave up because someone told you they were too much. Integration means no part of you gets left behind. That's why your love life hasn't worked yet, not because you're unlovable, but because you've been loving from exile, from outside your center, from the abandoned edges of your being. And people can feel that. They don't respond to your words, they respond to your energy. You say, I'm worthy, but your frequency whispers, please don't leave. You say, I love myself, but your energy pleads, validate me. You say, I'm fine on my own, but your presence shouts, save me. And here's the breakthrough: you don't need to be fixed. You need to be returned to yourself, fully, fiercely, tenderly. You need to bring all your exiled parts back into the light, not with judgment, but with reverence. Because every part of you was created to protect you. Every defense, every mask, every reaction, it kept you alive. It kept you safe. It helped you survive in a world that taught you love was conditional. But survival is not living. Survival is not love. And you're ready for more. That's why you're here. That's why you're still listening. Because some part of you knows that true love will never arrive as long as you're fragmented. And you're done offering people pieces of yourself and calling it connection. You're done begging for someone to love you enough to make you feel whole. You're done handing over your power in exchange for temporary intimacy. You're ready to love from your center, to speak from your truth, to be seen, not for your performance, but for your presence. And when you get there, when you live from that embodied truth, something shifts. You stop chasing love. You stop proving your worth. You stop explaining your needs. You stop waiting to be chosen, because you've already chosen yourself. And in that self-choosing, you become magnetic. Not to everyone, but to the ones who've done the same. To the ones who don't need you to shrink, who don't punish your honesty, who don't mistake your depth for danger, who see your shadow and bow to its wisdom because they've met their own. This is what love looks like when it's built on wholeness. It's not always easy, but it's always real. It's not about being comfortable, it's about being true. And that kind of love, that kind of resonance, it begins and ends with you. Because the truth is, most people are not afraid of being unloved, they are afraid of being truly seen. Because being truly seen means your masks no longer work. Your defenses no longer protect you. Your image no longer saves you from the risk of intimacy. To be truly seen is to be vulnerable in the most sacred way. And yet this is what you crave the most, not shallow admiration, not performance-based validation, but a soul-level recognition that says, I see you. And I'm not leaving. But that recognition cannot come until you offer it to yourself first. You must look into the eyes of your own reflection and say, I see you, the one who tried so hard, the one who fought to be enough, the one who survived by becoming whatever others needed. And I'm not leaving you either. Because your wholeness is not something you find in another. It's something you remember in yourself. Carl Jung knew that the soul cannot thrive in distortion, and distortion is what happens when you perform a self that is not aligned with your truth. You become a role, a character, a curated version of who you think you should be. And it works for a while. It gains you love, applause, opportunities. But deep down, there's always that ache, that emptiness that follows even the best days, that haunting sense that no matter how much you do, it's still not enough. That's not failure. That's the call to return, to integrate, to become. You want real love. You want to be truly held. Then stop negotiating your soul for scraps of connection. Stop performing wholeness and start embodying it. Stop hiding your depth to stay acceptable to people who haven't met their own. Stop shrinking your truth into bite-sized pieces just to avoid being too much. Because here's what no one tells you: your too muchness is only overwhelming to those who have never dared to be full themselves. You're not too sensitive. You're attuned. You're not too intense. You're alive. You're not too emotional. You're honest. These are not flaws. These are frequencies. But until you stop apologizing for them, you'll keep attracting people who need you to dim. People who love your light only when it stays small enough to keep them comfortable. And that is not love. That is control dressed as connection. Jung didn't teach comfort. He taught confrontation. He taught us to face our projections, our triggers, our unmet needs, not to fix them, but to meet them with compassion. And that work, it's not glamorous. It's not something you can showcase on social media. It's quiet, unseen, messy. It looks like sobbing in the dark when you finally realize you've been betraying yourself for years. It looks like ending a relationship not because you don't care, but because you care too much to keep lying. It looks like telling someone, "This is what I need," even when your voice shakes. And it's in those moments, those sacred ruptures, that you begin to build a new relationship with yourself. One that isn't based on conditional love, but on radical presence. One where you no longer leave yourself even when others do. One where you no longer demand perfection before offering compassion. One where you say, "I'm worthy now," in the mess, in the middle, in the unknown, because that's the only place real love can find you, in the truth. Not in the script, not in the image, not in the role, but in the raw, trembling, unfiltered aliveness of your actual being. That is where resonance begins. That is where intimacy is born. That is where everything changes. And yes, it's terrifying. To love from that place means risking heartbreak. It means letting people in where it actually matters. It means no longer having the protection of your performance. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to avoid pain, you become free. Because pain is not the enemy. Pretending is. Numbing is. Hiding is. It is not love that breaks you. It is the absence of truth. And when you understand that, you stop chasing certainty. You stop needing guarantees. You stop waiting for someone else to go first. You become the one. The one who shows up fully. The one who loves without losing themselves. The one who holds their own hand in the dark. The one who chooses truth even when it costs connection, because they know that any connection that cannot hold the truth is not worth keeping. This is the love you've been waiting for, a love rooted in wholeness, not in lack. A love that says, "I don't need you to complete me. I want to meet you from my fullness." A love that doesn't beg, chase, manipulate, or perform. A love that breathes. A love that expands. A love that has nothing to prove because it already is. And it begins with you, not when you're healed, not when you're perfect, not when you've finally figured it all out. Now, as you are, with all of it, the mess, the brilliance, the fear, the fire. Because the moment you stop resisting your own soul, love stops resisting you. But love, when you finally allow it to be what it truly is, not a reward, not a transaction, not a performance, but a mirror, will humble you. It will show you not what you want to see, but what you need to see. It will not gently tiptoe around your edges. It will pour light into the crevices you've kept hidden. And if you're not ready, You'll call this light pain. You'll call it rejection. You'll call it abandonment. But it's not any of those things. It's revelation, and revelation by nature disrupts. It breaks the old shell. And that cracking, that's what you've mistaken for heartbreak. Carl Jung understood this deeply, that the people who break you open are not your enemies. They are your sacred messengers. They come not to hurt you, but to show you what you've built your identity around. That's why it hurts so much when they leave. Not just because you miss them, but because they take the mirror with them. And you are left with the question, without them, who am I? And if that question terrifies you, it's only because you've never been given permission to answer it without someone else's gaze. So, here is your permission now. To no longer define yourself by who stays or who leaves. To no longer shape your worth around the roles you play or the responses you receive. To no longer seek safety in being understood, but in understanding yourself. Because when you understand yourself, when you look into the depths and say, "This is me, and I will no longer apologize," you stop needing the world to make sense of you. You stop needing someone to choose you so that you feel real. The truth is, most people are not chasing love. They are chasing confirmation. Confirmation that they are enough, that they are worthy, that they are safe, that they are seen. But confirmation will always be fragile because it depends on something outside of you. Love, when rooted in self-awareness, becomes unshakable, not because you never feel fear, but because fear no longer decides your life. And when fear no longer leads your relationships, change. You stop being magnetized by people who recreate your childhood wounds. You stop feeling chemistry with those who mirror your trauma. You stop calling chaos passion. You stop mistaking inconsistency for excitement. You begin to desire something subtler, quieter, deeper. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally grown up. And your nervous system, once addicted to intensity, begins to crave safety. Not the kind that comes from control, but the kind that comes from congruence. When your words match your truth. When your energy aligns with your essence, when your presence no longer requires explanation. Jung called this individuation, not becoming better, but becoming whole. Not polishing your image, but returning to your nature. And when two individuated people meet, the connection feels different. It doesn't spike. It doesn't burn through you like a wildfire. It settles. It expands. It feels like home. Not because it's perfect, but because it's present. Because it honors the full spectrum. Because it allows the shadow into the room without trying to fix it. And suddenly, everything you thought love was supposed to be intoxicating, dramatic, full of high stakes and low valleys, starts to feel immature. You don't want the roller coaster anymore. You want the ground. You want someone who meets you, not because they need to, but because they choose to. Someone who sees you not as a solution to their pain, but as a companion in their expansion. And you cannot find that until you become that. So, yes, you may feel alone at first. You may feel the silence more deeply than you ever have. You may grieve the connections that no longer match your truth. But in that stillness, you begin to hear something else. Your own voice. The one that's been drowned out by noise. The one that was never loud, but always true. The one that doesn't scream for attention, it simply waits to be listened to. That voice is your anchor. That voice is your compass. That voice is your original self, the you before the world told you who to be. And when you listen long enough, you remember you were never looking for someone to complete you. You were looking for someone who didn't require you to leave yourself behind. But you cannot be loved that way if you are still abandoning yourself. So you stop. Not all at once, but moment by moment. You catch yourself in the act of shrinking and choose to expand instead. You catch yourself preparing to lie to keep the peace and choose to tell the truth with love. You catch yourself about to chase and instead sit with the discomfort. And in those micro decisions, something holy happens. You become trustworthy to yourself. And that more than anything is the foundation of real love. Not attraction, not romance, not compatibility tests. Trust. Do you trust yourself to stay? to speak, to soften without dissolving, to hold space for your own emotions without needing someone else to fix them. Because until you do, love will always feel unsafe. Not because it is, but because you are not fully with yourself in it. The path to real love is not paved with grand gestures. It's paved with small choices to come back home to yourself again and again, to let love rise from presence, not pressure, from clarity, not confusion, from alignment, not avoidance. This is the revolution: to choose love without losing yourself, to give without depletion, to receive without suspicion, to stand open-hearted without defense, not because you trust others to never hurt you, but because you trust yourself to never abandon you again. That is what makes love possible. So much of what we call love today is nothing more than mutual projection. We meet someone, and without even realizing it, we project our unmet needs, our unresolved wounds, our forgotten longings onto their face, and they do the same to us. We don't fall in love with who they are. We fall in love with the part of ourselves we believe they will finally make whole. But projection is fragile, because the moment they stop reflecting back what we want to see, the illusion begins to crack, and we call it disappointment. We call it betrayal. But it's not. It's disillusionment, the removal of illusion. It's not the relationship that failed. It's the fantasy. Carl Jung warned us of this. He said, "We always see our own unavowed mistakes in our opponent, and the same is true in love. We see our unmet desires in our lovers. We don't fall for them. We fall for who we are in their presence. And that is why love built on projection cannot last. Because it is not rooted in reality. It is rooted in hope, in desperation, in longing to be completed by someone else. But no one can complete what you've refused to claim. So here is the truth you've been avoiding. You are not half a person waiting for your missing piece. You are a whole being who has forgotten their wholeness. And no amount of romance chemistry or validation will ever substitute the reunion with yourself. Because even if they stay, even if they love you, even if they try to give you the world, you will not feel it if you are not home inside. This is why people can be in a relationship and still feel profoundly alone. This is why you can be told you are loved 1,000 times and still doubt it. Because love cannot land in a self that is closed, and we close ourselves when we reject our own truth, when we abandon our inner child, when we ignore the voice that whispers, "This doesn't feel safe just to keep someone around." Love cannot find you if you are not within yourself to receive it. And so we repeat the patterns over and over, not because we are cursed, but because the soul will keep bringing the same lesson until we choose to learn it. Until we stop asking, "Why do I keep attracting emotionally unavailable people?" and start asking, "What part of me is still unavailable to myself?" Until we stop wondering, "Why do I always end up hurt?" and start asking, "Why do I still betray my boundaries to be chosen?" The pattern is not the problem. The pattern is the portal. It's your shadow knocking, not to punish you, but to awaken you. And awakening is not glamorous. It's not a sudden epiphany followed by bliss. It's a quiet, often painful process of stripping away everything false, of grieving not just people, but identities, of looking into the mirror and seeing the masks you've worn for decades and choosing for the first time to take them off. Not for someone else, not to earn love, but because you are finally ready to be real. And when you do that, when you show up without the performance, without the polish, without the perfection, something radical happens. You begin to attract differently. You stop magnetizing chaos. You stop recreating your trauma. You start feeling drawn to peace, to presence, to people who don't activate your wounds, but resonate with your wholeness. Not because they are perfect, but because you are no longer asking them to carry the weight of your healing. This is how relationships evolve from wounds to wisdom, from codependence to collaboration, from addiction to alignment. When you meet someone from your healed space, love becomes less about what you can get and more about what you can grow. It's no longer a strategy, it's an offering. And here's the paradox. The more whole you become, the less you need love, and the more you're able to truly receive it. Because it no longer fills a hole, it expands a foundation. It's not a remedy, it's a reflection of your inner peace, your self-respect, your emotional maturity. And in that kind of love, there is room for the full spectrum: joy and grief, laughter and silence, desire and fear. Nothing has to be hidden, because nothing in you is unloved. But to get there, you must become the lover you've always searched for. You must speak to yourself with reverence. You must protect your heart with boundaries, not walls. You must hold your own pain without needing someone else to rescue you. You must stop waiting to be chosen and choose yourself again and again, especially when it's hard. This is the work. This is the revolution. To love without possession, to give without depletion, to receive without guilt, to stay soft in a world that taught you to be hard, to remain open in a world that trained you to shut down, to become a safe space not just for others, but for your own soul. And when you do, everything changes, not because the world becomes easier, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. You stop living on the surface and start inhabiting the depths. You stop grasping and start allowing. You stop fearing endings and start honoring beginnings. Because you finally trust yourself to hold what matters. Not perfectly, but consciously. That's the love you've been searching for. And it was never out there. It was always waiting just beneath the noise, the projections, the masks. In the quiet presence of your own heart. So this is where the journey ends, not in some grand explosion of enlightenment, not in a perfect relationship, not in a storybook ending where everything makes sense. No, it ends here in the stillness, in the quiet, knowing that you have come home to yourself. That the love you have been seeking your whole life, the one that feels like belonging, like safety, like resonance, was never outside of you. It was the you that you had left behind. The self you abandoned while trying to be loved, the voice you silenced while trying to be accepted, the truth you suppressed while trying to be chosen. And now that you've returned, you begin to see love differently. Not as a prize to earn, but as a frequency to embody. Not as something given or withheld by others, but as something you choose to express toward yourself, toward life, toward those who can meet you there. You stop begging the universe to bring you someone who sees your worth and instead become someone who reflects it. Because when your relationship with yourself is whole, your standards evolve. Your boundaries sharpen, your longing softens, and your magnetism intensifies, not because you're performing, but because you've stopped performing altogether. This is the paradox of love. The less you chase it, the more it reveals itself. The less you depend on it, the deeper it finds you. Not in intensity, but in honesty. Not in fantasy, but in presence. And when it arrives, not as a spark, but as a steady flame, you no longer doubt it. Because it doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't require a mask. It doesn't disappear when you show your shadows. It stays. Because you stayed. Carl Jung taught us that to be whole is to embrace all that we are. Not just the light, but the dark. Not just the strength, but the softness. Not just the clarity, but the confusion. He showed us that individuation, the process of becoming truly ourselves, is the most important and the most spiritual task of our lives. And love, real love, is the natural result of that process, because when we are whole, we no longer love to fill a void. We love to express truth, and that truth is unshakable. It doesn't rise and fall with rejection. It doesn't fracture under absence. It doesn't depend on perfect timing or flawless chemistry. It is steady, quiet, grounded. It says, I'm here, not because you complete me, not because I need you, but because I am whole, and from that wholeness I offer you my presence. When you love from this place, you are no longer a seeker. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer surviving. You are living. You are being. And in that being, you invite others to meet you, not in fantasy, not in projection, but in reality, in humanness, in sacred imperfection. And when you are met there, something beautiful happens. You stop fearing love. You stop fearing loss. Because love is no longer something that can be taken from you. It is something you carry, something you become. That is the real revolution. Not a relationship, not an external validation, but a life that is lived in full integration with your past, your pain, your power. A life where you no longer perform for acceptance but express from truth. A life where love is not a roller coaster but a river flowing from your center, reaching only those who are ready to swim beside you. And even if no one comes, not for a while, not ever, you are no longer afraid. Because you are not empty, you are not waiting, you are not incomplete, you are full, you are awake, you are deeply, irrevocably alive. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But he also knew it is the most liberating. Because once you accept yourself, the world can no longer manipulate you with conditional love. You are no longer susceptible to those who offer love in exchange for your silence. You are no longer seduced by chaos masquerading as passion. You are no longer addicted to being needed. You simply are, and that is enough. From this place, every relationship becomes a mirror, but not a prison. Every encounter becomes an invitation, but not a requirement. You begin to navigate love not as a void to be filled, but as a sacred exchange. You don't demand, you don't beg, you don't contort. You show up, fully, unapologetically, with your softness intact, with your fire alive, with your heart open, but not bleeding. Because you've stopped waiting to be chosen. You've stopped hoping someone else will save you. You've stopped giving your power to people who cannot even hold their own. And in that stillness, something awakens. Love stops being something you chase and becomes something you are.